All you kids make me sick.
Oh, please, use my body to keep you alive.
Drugs. Often the introduction comes in the form of a goofball.
Paula, I may be a bitch, but I'll never be a butch.
Better than the girl who sells herself to a man. You're worse. And now little Miss Bucket is in trouble, and she's all outraged virtue.
I have a drug here, LSD. Perhaps you've heard of it.
And you listen. And you listen well. You're damaged merchandise, and this is a fire sale.
Well, Frank, looks like one of those long, hard ones.
Have you ever had an Egyptian feast?
Greg, look at your hand. Our hands are bleeding. It's Montag. He's doing it.
Down inside, you're dirty. Do you hear me? Dirty.
The word hallucination is defined as an apparent perception as by sight or hearing for which there is no real or external cause. From this word is derived the name given to a special group of drugs, the hallucinogens.
I don't usually see something that's an actual real thing that I could describe as, sometimes, one time I saw a lot of faces. Just all these faces appeared in front of me. And they were children's faces and oriental faces and old faces and just all kinds of different faces in front of me. And one time I looked in the mirror and I saw just my face just went through all these changes of different emotions and ages, and I could feel all of the things that I saw.
Among these drugs, the hallucinogens, are included mescaline, a chemical taken from the peyote cactus, psilocybin, extracted from a variety of Mexican mushroom, DMT, synthesized from the compound tryptamine, and of course, LSD-25, a derivative of lysergic acid and currently the best known of the hallucinogens. From the very beginnings of unrecorded time, men have reached for substances in the world around them that would alter, extend, and materially change their perception of reality. The reasons? Loneliness and fear, boredom and a desire for the new and the unknown, exploration and experimentation. The reasons? as varied and as many as the grains of sand on a beach.
Taking it in 1965 because I was curious about it. I had several friends who had taken it, and they told me that they had, very good experiences with it, and I was just curious.
Well, I was curious what I read and what I've heard, and if it could help, I was just looking for something.
Sort of because I had heard it makes you not only closer with yourself, but with everybody, this sort of love, peace type thing. And I really wanted to find out if this was true.
It was a kick. It was a thrill. When I first started taking it was to explore myself. Well, I found I could only go so far before I just ran dead up against myself, and I couldn't go any farther. And then after that, I just started taking it for kicks, just to do something.
Some have used these drugs to journey into the uncharted tunnels of the mind in search of medical and scientific truth. Others look behind the curtain just for kicks. Whatever the reason, the fact of the matter is, the use of these drugs is on the rise, and it would seem valuable and interesting to inquire into cause and effect. Since LSD is the hallucinogen drug currently most popular and in greatest demand, we will center our attention here, and later draw broad conclusions concerning all of the mind-bending drugs. As a starter, here are some hard facts worth considering. LSD is incredibly powerful. Eating or injecting even as small a quantity of LSD as 1/280,000th of an ounce can cause such symptoms as hallucination, distortion, panic, impulses toward violence, suicidal acts, and psychosis. Today, we know quite a bit about what it does, but very little about how it does it. Scientific studies have shown that the physical effects of LSD include an increase in blood pressure, heart rate, and blood sugar. These physiological changes are often accompanied by nausea, chills, flushes, irregular breathing, trembling, and sweating. Recent research on animals has shown that LSD may cause cell damage and lead to serious abnormalities and malformations in the offspring. In one study, 4 or 5 pregnant animals were given a single injection of LSD. The results showed early abortion, stillborn, and underdeveloped offspring. In the culture of human blood cells, it was found that LSD damaged the chromosomes in the white cells. In addition to these physical symptoms, there is clear evidence of serious psychological and emotional disturbances resulting from even a single use of LSD. The group use of the hallucinogens at parties is becoming a familiar part of the scene. An atmosphere is created, and mass use of the drug becomes the central factor in the lives of many young men and women. The problem is that while the drug is not physically addicting, there is considerable evidence that it can cause psychological dependence. So let's count the cost and take a good look at the results.
I remember once I wasn't using LSD, it was peyote, which is reasonably similar. And I was in bed with a young lady, And I turned and I looked at her face, and her face distorted into sort of a flesh-dripping monster face. You know, features became drawn and like jowls hung, and she grew fangs. And I quickly turned my head away, and I told myself this couldn't be so. And for about an hour, I wouldn't look at her face again. It was really frightening.
No matter which way I was facing, it was just real frightening. I went into this survival land, and I was afraid everyone was going to go there, and that things were never going to be the same, and that everyone was going to become real vicious and hateful, and just climb on top of each other to get what they wanted.
A lot of times everything vibrates. I look at chairs, and I can see the waves in them, and it's pulsating, vibrating. And this, everything turns into vibrations. It's like everything is falling apart. My eyes are an electronic microscope, and I can see all the atoms and everything. Everything pulsates.
I took the acid around 2 in the morning and started reading this book. And there are sections in it that give instructions to a person who is dead. And they tell him to do certain things and hang on to certain things and let go of other certain things, allowing the experience to happen to you naturally. And in the course of that, I got very confused as to whether I was alive or whether I was dead. I mean, it was really very, very far out to just not know whether I was alive or dead. And so if I'm dead, what is happening? What's been happening with my life if I've been dead all this time? You know, what is the truth behind all of this?
All the results are not yet in. The evidence is inconclusive. The only thing we know for sure is that we just don't know enough. In carefully controlled experiments, interesting results have been reported on the therapeutic use of LSD with the mentally ill, the drug addict, the terminal cancer patient. And in the VA hospital in Topeka, Kansas, a special research program for alcoholics.
Well, this program was started in January of this year, where we began treating 5 patients for 26 days. We bring them in on one Monday, and they spend 1 week of getting acquainted, having all the tests and examinations done to keep them busy for the whole week, day and night practically. The second Monday, we give them a small dose of LSD in the 5-man ward together. This is to help the group pull together, and in their group experience during this 26 days to also get some good from this. Then the third Monday, we give them a larger dose individually and have each one of them cared for by one of these teams who have associated with them, and they give them their complete support. And this is where we aim for the so-called psychedelic experience. It seems to work pretty well. Of course, it takes time to work through. Also, in this program, we bring these men back every 4 months for 3 days, and this follow-up is quite important.
Some of the things that are outstanding is I know I kept fighting the religious music. I didn't know why then, but Dr. Coran kept urging me to find out why I was fighting this. And I remember I was just literally scared to death.
The thing that affected me as far as the first patient is concerned was the openness which he talked with me. The quality also seemed to be more realistic than he has shown before.
These qualities in my head, the good qualities, of course, virtue, love, trust. And then I've seen the other ones: hate, anger, distrust, I seen them all in my head, and it was like I was strangling myself, like I had to get rid of all the bad qualities, and I was strangling myself fighting against them.
And especially the looking at the two sides in his head in this process. These things were thought about rather deeply, and the thing that makes the difference here is the emotion that goes along with them.
And I just reached up, and it was like somebody grabbed me and brought me up. And I interpret this as, for the first time in my life, I wanted love. And I think this is the thing that was probably my biggest problem, is that I thought everybody was forcing it on me and I wasn't going to let them.
Yeah.
But it's not a question
I
of
think
forcing,
from
it's a question
hearing this man report his experience that there definitely is a change as of now. As far as prognosis is concerned, time.
There are currently over 50 research projects in progress under the auspices of the Food and Drug Administration and the National Institute of Mental Health, all part of our continuing search to discover more about the hallucinogens. The questions remain. The mind-bending drugs seem to offer so much, but what do they really deliver?
As to what it has to offer, that's a difficult question, because what we've seen here have been some things that I don't think most kids thought they were getting when they took the drug. We've seen some kids that have had prolonged psychosis. Some have had to go to state hospitals. Some have been treated for 2 or 3 months and have been able to leave UCLA. Some of them have had severe depressions. Some have been very confused. And some of the groovy hallucinations and the colors that they wanted, they couldn't stop. They got tired of it after 12 or 18 hours, but they couldn't stop the colors.
How do they work, and what are the long-range effects of this drug on human personality?
Well, we don't know a great deal about long-range effects. People always are asking about chronic brain damage. What we do know, first of all, is that the electroencephalogram, or brainwave test, on this we see in electrodes that are on the scalp and also depth electrodes planted inside the brain, we see changes from LSD in man and animals after a normal dose, and these changes last from 1 to 2 weeks after administration. In addition, we also see the reoccurrences. You take LSD once, the effect wears off in 12 to 16 hours, then up to a year later, either with stress or without stress, without ever taking the drug again, you have the same reoccurrences. The people call them flashes or flashbacks. Reoccurrences of all the LSD symptoms in their original intensity. Certainly this implies that something chronic is going on in the brain.
Do these drugs really make possible a richer, more productive, happier life?
When we follow them along, what we're impressed with is their whole style of life may change. That instead of being involved in productive activity, they claim that they feel better, and yet this feeling better is alongside of a business where they've withdrawn from life, they're disregarding their personal appearance, they don't really care about how they function in the rest of the world, and they're involved in a kind of a pseudo-philosophic concern with life and themselves, with a real absence of contact with other human beings. So it's this interesting business of a kind of withdrawal and the statement that this kind of life makes them feel much better and more insightful.
Should the federal government exercise any control over these drugs? And if so, why?
It's a simple matter from our point of view that you can't let something get out into general distribution until it has shown some therapeutic potential. And it has shown it under certain conditions, and you can predict fairly well what's going to happen when you give this drug to a large number of people. This hasn't been shown yet, so we have to be very careful in trying to carry out the necessary research that's going to establish whether or not it has a significant therapeutic potential for people. If it does...
Questions that must be answered. And because we do not know enough, the United States government controls the manufacture and use of this drug in the interest of all the people. Like all the new drugs, the government feels that a reasonable degree of controlled scientific investigation must provide the answers. LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, DMT, and the other hallucinogens, the mind-bending drugs. Do they extend the range of the human mind, or do they simply offer an easy escape from the demands of this world and time?
I get up and make love and play the guitar and eat, go down to the beach and go swimming and occasionally write some things when I feel like writing and think about how I'm going to get a little more money to not starve to death. And
it gets you out of that whole intellectual academic framework that you've been taught to be in all the years that you've gone to school.
Not only emotional hang-ups, but social hang-ups. Don't do this and don't do that, and you shouldn't associate with these people and this and that. The things that, mores, you might say, that I was brought up with.
I get flashes of people seeing me, and it's kind of a schizophrenic thing. In a way, I want people to see me, and sometimes don't.
I'd get up and I'd feel like someone had a rawhide band around my forehead, and it was just such a pressure that by afternoon I'd be crying. So every morning I'd wake up with this pressure, and every afternoon I'd cry.
Do they make possible creative achievement and a more valid and intense perception? Or do they merely substitute an unreal fantasy world for the sometimes harsh facts of reality?
Oh yes, I think that I experience things much more intensely now than, I've hallucinated without having any drugs since I've taken LSD.
Had very vivid light experiences. Sometimes I went into lights that are brighter than the sun.
And I see patterns in everything, in dirt, in trees. There's patterns everywhere.
And right then, I hallucinated a fish that just came and swallowed the worm. And I said to myself, oh boy, this is it. This stuff is really as good as they say it is.
Drugs are going to flip a lot of people out and probably kill a lot of people. But if they haven't the sense to find out all there is that's been written about anything they're going to use, and if they haven't the discretion to decide whether or not, in the final analysis, they're capable of handling it, then that's their problem. They will flip out, and that's how it is.
Can they truly broaden and increase the life experience? Or do they rather contract the user's world until it centers totally and wholly around the drug?
Yeah, I was looking for a lot of things because I was really strung out at that time on not finding anything in life that was too interesting.
A great, great fear of being alone. Just, I could be with a group of people, but I couldn't communicate to them.
Well, what can scare you is that all structure can break down. Everything can become one, and that's sort of scary. Another thing that can happen is when you're really far out, things just can disappear.
Because as you suggested, I'm one, allergic to it, and two, I don't like to even entertain the notion that that sort of flip out may occur again.
I'm not afraid of anything anymore, which is, has its good points and its bad points. I'm especially, not afraid to die. I became suicidal for a while, and every now and then go back to there.
The true potential of the hallucinogenic drugs remains unmeasured and largely unknown. The danger of lasting physical and psychological damage to the user remains an important factor in the rising use of these drugs.
I think a lot of kids say that at first, and then after they're through talking to Dr. Fisher and I, they change their mind. Because we certainly think rebellion is a very healthy thing, and we like rebellion. And we think great changes in society come out of rebellion. And we think that we adults have kind of screwed things up. We haven't done a very good job in the adult world. With the bomb hanging over us in Vietnam, with our crazy ideas about censorship, our crazy sexual attitudes, our abortion laws, we haven't done a very good job. I do think that fooling with LSD is like Russian roulette. I don't think it's like swallowing goldfish. I don't think it's spinning a hula hoop or crowding a lot of people into a telephone booth. I think, unfortunately, this can be a permanent, long-lasting, damaging situation. So I'm all for rebellion. I think a great deal of good can come out of it. I hope people who are considering using LSD, however, will think of some of these things. We don't know them all. We do know a few, though. And one of the ones that we really know is that they may be damaging themselves permanently.
The facts of the matter suggest caution and a careful counting of the cost.
His name is Bob, and this is his best friend, Chuck. They are both 17. Chuck was behind the wheel and traveling fast, perhaps too fast. He screamed, clawed at his eyes, and rammed head-on into an oncoming car. Chuck's girlfriend is badly injured. The other driver is dead. And so is Chuck. Why this? What happened? It was only a few short weeks ago, really. Bob and Chuck were friends. Good friends. They enjoyed a lot of good times together. Nothing really unusual about Bob and Chuck, just a couple of guys in the midst of the normal process of becoming adults. Certainly nothing to foreshadow the tragic events in which they were to find themselves, unless it was another group of young people from school. Frank and his group. They too had an interest. Lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, acid, 25. Take your pick. It's equally dangerous under any name. Like most acid heads, Frank had a compulsion to turn others on. Maybe unconsciously he felt less guilty about his weakness if he could get others to do as he did. There's a much better way to fly than with toy planes. He tried to be persuasive, but there was something weird about the way he acted. It was an old approach: taunts, dares, ridicule. If you don't turn on, you don't belong. You gotta turn on, tune in, and drop out. Experience the mind-expanding powers of acid. It's psychedelic, baby. That's what it's all about. Bob was not impressed. He didn't know much about LSD, but what he had heard he didn't like. Acid seemed like a whole lot more trouble than it was worth. Sure, taunted Frank, exactly what the establishment wants you to believe, and you just eat it up. Bob wasn't convinced, but Chuck was not quite so unaffected. Although he tried to appear nonchalant, the adventure in it appealed to him. What if it really does give you a greater insight to yourself? At least we can try the stuff, Chuck argued. What harm can that do? Bob was adamant. It would just be a stupid thing to do. And for the first time, the boys had a real disagreement and went their separate ways. Bob was surprised. He tried to talk with his friend. But Chuck, perhaps to hide his embarrassment, was aggressively defensive. In fact, just to prove to Bob that he's his own master, he informed him defiantly that he'd be taking his first acid trip that very day. Bob was disturbed. What was happening to Chuck and the others? Simple. Acid. LSD. What is the truth about it? The real truth? Maybe it isn't so bad. Bob decided to find out, not from being told by anyone else, pro or con. He'd make his own inquiries. The library provided ample scientific information about the drug itself. Lysergic acid diethylamide, 25, was first synthesized in Switzerland in 1938 by a biochemist, Dr. Albert Hoffman, while studying a parasitic fungus that attacked European rye fields. In its pure form, LSD is colorless, with no taste or odor, and when distributed to the users, it is mixed with other ingredients to get bulk. The drug is usually found in capsule or tablet form, in liquid vials, or in the now outdated sugar cube. A single ounce would provide an average dose for 300,000 people. The observable effects on the body from taking LSD are only slight, the most notable being a dilation of the pupil, making the eyes supersensitive to light. But while the physiological effects are quite unspectacular, the effects on the mind are explosively disruptive. Reaction to the drug is completely unpredictable. It can be the hoped-for heaven or a hell full of horror, and there are all too many cases of young people who have become permanently deranged through a single terrifying acid trip, while many others have cruelly injured or mutilated themselves in their deluded state of mind. There is no sure antidote for a bad trip. Although tranquilizers and barbiturates are used, they are not always effective. No deaths have yet been reported for an overdose of the drug, so the lethal dose is unknown. In some cases, damage may be inflicted on the user's chromosomes, which influence heredity. The younger the person, the greater the damage. Although the indiscriminate use of LSD is too new for any experimental certainties, there have been births of deformed babies where the drug is the strongly suspected cause. And it is a fact that animal embryos have been horribly deformed by mothers who had been given average doses of LSD. The effects of the drug usually end in 6 to 10 hours, but the risk of an unsuspected mental time bomb remaining is always there. Unexpected recurrence of all the effects in their original intensity has been reported as long as a year after the last trip. One of the claims made for LSD is that it frees the mind for creative thinking and work, yet only the opposite has been proven. It is only in the subject's own deranged mind that his abilities are expanded, a cruel self-delusion. Actually, his creativity is so distorted no relationship to reality is possible. So, while there are bona fide medical uses and benefits to be derived from the drug, the LSD image made popular by certain advocates is based on myth, while the inherent dangers are based on facts. From a legal standpoint, most offenses involving LSD are classified as felonies. Even the possession of a small amount is a misdemeanor. The drug is considered so dangerous that all legitimate manufacturers have ceased production, and LSD is only legally available for research purposes. Therefore, to provide the acid head with his instant escape, the drug is being produced by underground amateur chemists in clandestine, often unsanitary laboratories, where control over quality is a joke, adding yet another danger to an already dangerous drug. And there is also ample evidence that organized crime is enjoying a good piece of the action. Who then could use such a harmful drug? Unfortunately, the ones most likely to become involved are the high-risk elements, the immature, the unstable, those who will risk everything without a thought to the future. One arrest, and never again will he be able to say no to the question, "Have you ever been arrested?" A fact that will have to be lived with for a long time. LSD is not habit-forming the way some other drugs are. It is worse. The user becomes psychologically hooked. That is one reason why national medical societies have called acid the most dangerous of all illegal drugs and narcotics. The latest findings, after prolonged and exhaustive studies, report strong indications of premature aging, increased susceptibility to cancer, especially fatal leukemia, and possible harm to children and even grandchildren through the use of LSD. How dangerous? How serious the permanent damage done? No one knows as yet. The answers will come from those young people who today are willing to use themselves unthinkingly as human guinea pigs. As one scientist put it, someday their affected brains may end up in laboratories and provide the answers. And while Bob was forming his opinions about LSD with facts, Chuck was getting his education firsthand. With an average dose of acid, the first symptoms may come in 15 minutes, but the usual reaction time is about 3/4 of an hour. So, the brave ones wait for an unknown reaction of the mind-distorting drug. Bob dug deeper. He talked with various kids at school whom he knew were or had been on LSD. He was concerned and puzzled by what he found. A definite shift of values was evident in the acid heads, a subtle but unmistakable change in attitude. They displayed a listless indifference instead of their former awareness, morbid introspection in place of productive activity, a disturbing, decaying, wasting away. The more Bob uncovered, the more he saw for himself the hardships and grief suffered by the parents and homes of misguided young people who are too weak to face reality and try to find a quick escape in a world of illusion. Unfortunately, these dreamy, psychedelic trips are very often one way. As the days went by, Bob grew increasingly concerned. He was learning the actual facts about LSD and the serious effects and consequences of taking it under non-medical, unsupervised conditions. It was a clear picture to which innumerable magazine and newspaper articles gave witness. Frightening accounts of self-inflicted injuries, mental breakdowns, violence, suicide, even murder. Chuck was also learning new things. Quick, easy ways to pay for his quick, easy pleasures. And he'd finally persuaded his girlfriend Susan to go on a beautiful trip with him, to merge their inner beings in a world of wonder and delight, to gain new mind-expanded insight to themselves and each other. Bob was determined to talk to Chuck and set out to find him. For Chuck, the acid trip was now a familiar route, so he decided to sit this one out to watch over Susan. But Susan was not quite turning on as he had planned. Chuck was alarmed. He hadn't bargained for a freak-out. Susan's car was downstairs, and he decided to take her home. Since it seemed impossible for Bob to get to and talk with his friend, he decided to write a letter. Without sounding stupid, Bob tried to put his honest feelings in the letter. He used the only tools he had left to influence his friend: reason and logic. Chuck didn't like it, but it was probably just a harmless little bonus from his last trip.
And those are the facts about LSD, Chuck. Honest.
There is just no future in being an acid head. You and I have been friends for a long time, and I don't want to try to tell you how to live your life, but like it or not, we are adults now, and we have the power to make decisions that will affect our entire lives. Before you know it, you will be seriously considering marriage. How do you think Susan would feel about the prospect of having deformed children? As for myself, I have just started to live, and I don't want to look back in a few years and have to say, was I ever a stupid kid? Maybe the world is all fouled up, but we sure don't have to do our bit to make it worse.
This girl is on an LSD trip. The music, a song of praise to LSD. A song of praise to acid. The hippies, the flower people, see LSD as an aid to self-knowledge, a key to the closed doors of the mind, perhaps a sacrament to the God they seek. The hippies use LSD as a vehicle unto themselves. The results are disturbing to society, but if nothing else, the hippies seem to have found some sort of peace, some refuge from a world which they reject. Not only do the hippies turn off the world, they also scorn its warnings and laws against LSD. They just do not believe those researchers who say LSD is dangerous. But the society the hippie rejects cannot ignore the ever-widening use of LSD by the non-hippie, especially the college student. Across the nation, college teachers like Dr. Nathan Back of the School of Pharmacy at the State University of New York in Buffalo sound a warning.
In view of the fact that we know very little as to how LSD works on the body, both its physical effects as well as mental effects, the increased use of LSD by our society should be viewed with great concern and alarm.
Millbrook, New York, home and temple of the high priest of acid, Dr. Timothy Leary, the ex-Harvard professor who claims that perhaps 3 million Americans have taken the acid trip. The mystic who uses LSD to find God and may well be the first acid martyr. I asked Tim Leary if the acid experience has changed him.
Well, LSD has changed me religiously. I was a smart aleck, Harvard professor, bourbon-drinking atheist, intellectual, before I took LSD. Now I'm God intoxicated. Has it changed me my personality? I don't think so. And I want to make this clear. LSD is no instant psychoanalysis. It's not going to change your television personality. It's not going to make you a better game player. There are no guarantees here of any change in personality. I don't think I've changed. What LSD does, it gives you more energy. So I play out the Timothy Leary game on a broader canvas. I've got more energy available to me. I'm more turned on, so more people listen to me. But I think I still have the same old faults, the same old selfishness, the same old tendency to deceive myself. See what's happening in the United States today, as millions of people, particularly young people, are taking LSD, they're just turning off. They won't make war for you anymore. They're a dropout generation. They're talking about flower power. They're forming, as we have here in Millbrook, their own little religious cults. Your rock and roll bands, most of them, believe it or not, are little religious cults. And the songs they're singing are religious, oriental, mystic.
Acid, show me the way. Look out, baby, my blood's turning cold. Come on, love, right into my soul.
I say to the young kids, form your own religion. Do as it's always been done. Turn on, tune in, and drop out.
And turn on they do, using the acid to blow their minds, seeking within themselves. There are 10 million different LSD trips. There is a thin line between the good trip and the bad trip.
Let's forget the word hate, yeah, and be forgiving. Now I need someone to take me by the hand, and I need someone to make me understand. Like a delicate mind, Spencer.
You have to approach LSD with trembling and with fear and with love to use it for harmony and beauty. What's going on in the United States today is a revolution in consciousness facilitated by these psychedelic chemicals. I frankly don't think that the human being is ready for LSD. As a matter of fact, I don't think the human being is ready for fire. But the trouble is, LSD is here. And what are we going to do about it? Should we pass a law against fire and say only doctors can have fire? Should we pass a law against LSD and say only doctors can take this trip to the divine process, go out of their minds, use this inner microscope? Of course we can't, because it's here and it's going to be used. That's the problem.
That indeed is the problem. But while the doctors admit that LSD may be useful in the treatment of alcoholism, homosexuality, and mental illness, they warn that they know almost nothing about it. Dr. Sidney Cohen, Chief of Psychiatric Service at Wadsworth Hospital in Los Angeles, has himself taken LSD.
I think that the juvenile, random, frivolous taking of LSD in a party setting without supervision is dangerous and is doing a good deal of harm. Some of the harm being the fact that we can't look at it studiously. We certainly are now prevented from ever incorporating this into our culture because the feelings of the populace have been polarized into great aversion and law passing concerning LSD. Others still think that this is the answer. I would say that it's somewhere in between, and this is what I would like to implore, that we try to look at the LSD scene as one of promise and potential, but also one of possible danger and despair.
There is much evidence that the lifeblood of the LSD user can be changed, that the chromosomes in the blood can be damaged by the acid, and it is the chromosomes that carry genetic information from one generation to the next. It is the chromosomes that determine whether the next generation conforms to our normality. The LSD user tends to reject the warning, or reply that the benefits of LSD outweigh its dangers. LSD researchers like Dr. Kurt Hirschhorn, chief of the Division of Medical Genetics at Mount Sinai Hospital, New York, have few doubts about LSD and chromosomal damage.
This cell has 2 broken chromosomes. The one just below the middle of the cell has 2 breaks in it, while the one just to the right of it has a single break. These findings are rather similar to those that have been previously described by other doctors who have taken cells from normal individuals and cultured them in the presence of LSD. In this case, we have taken the cells from a patient who has been on LSD and added no further LSD to the culture. Findings like these have been described from patients who have received radiation, who have had various viral diseases, and who have leukemia and other cancers. It is also known that such breaks, when produced by radiation, can be followed by an increased incidence of leukemia in the patients and other cancers, as well as in the production of congenital malformations in the offspring of such patients, as well as in their children's children.
At the Children's Hospital in Buffalo, New York, there has been considerable research into the effects of LSD on the chromosomes. Dr. Mayman Cohen is Director of Psychogenetics.
The danger, or the potential danger, to the LSD user, not only to himself, but to his offspring, is real. And until we have all of the answers in, which will come only after much more extensive research, it is advisable that LSD be put on the shelf as a very dangerous and noxious poison. Children born to LSD users, if the egg or the sperm is damaged by the LSD, may give rise to a whole host of genetic or congenital abnormalities at birth. Most of these chromosomal abnormalities are usually associated with mental retardation, as well as other physical deformities. Perhaps the most widespread known of all of the chromosomal abnormalities is the mongoloid child that has an extra chromosome. It is possible that these individuals using LSD can cause chromosomal damage to their germ cells, which will not be detected in themselves, but will only be detected in the physical deformities of their offspring.
This is the heart of the LSD user's dilemma. Has he the right to play acid roulette with his children? The probing into LSD continues. Associate Professor of Pharmacology at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, New York, Dr. Murray Jarvik, experiments on monkeys.
We were interested in seeing what effect LSD would have on visual discrimination performance in monkeys and also on memory. It's been shown by a number of investigators, not only me, that the drug does have very strange effects in animals. Under some circumstances, it impairs performance, and under others, it actually improves performance. But a great deal more work remains to be done before we can really understand what the drug does and how it is doing it.
Dr. Jarvik wants to know how LSD affects the rhesus monkey. He injects the drug into monkeys to find out whether he can duplicate man's LSD experience in the animal closest to man. Dr. Jarvik says that the LSD effects can be seen in the rhesus monkey, yet LSD remains an enigma.
Performance on a test of short-term memory was impaired by rather small doses of LSD in our monkeys. We used what's known as a delayed alternation test and found that as little as 5 gamma, that is 5 millionths of a gram per kilogram, was capable of impairing performance in these animals. On the other hand, other investigators have found that very low doses of LSD would improve performance in certain types of visual discrimination tests, an ability of an animal to discriminate flicker from steady light. The most important thing that is still unexplained is the mechanism whereby this drug produces its effects. Despite a tremendous amount of research that's gone into this, and there must be well over 1,000 research papers on the effects of LSD, we still don't know what the basic mechanism of action of this drug is in the brain.
This is Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital, New York. More than 250 LSD users have been treated for mental disturbances in Bellevue's wards. Yet the champions of LSD question the very definition of mental illness. rationalizing that one man's psychotic is another man's mystic. Dr. William Frosch of Bellevue's Psychiatry Department.
Here at Bellevue, in the last 2.5 years, we've seen a fairly large number of admissions of patients who come into the hospital, usually shortly after they've taken lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. In the 2.5 years, we've seen an average of about 10 per month, and this has been fairly consistent, and so we've seen a total of approximately 250 patients in that time. Of the 10 a month who come in, about 2 or 3, that is a quarter of them, come in after their first trip with LSD, after their first experience with the drug. The others have had more experience, another quarter have had up to 5 trips, and the remainder come in after as many as 200 or 300 trips on LSD. About half of them come in with fairly acute psychiatric pictures, and these are either the direct result of the drug. For example, somebody becomes slightly confused under the influence of the drug and may wander up Fifth Avenue against traffic and picked up by the police and then brought into the hospital. Occasionally, patients under the direct influence of the drug may, in response to unusual thoughts stimulated by it, may think they can fly, may try to go out of a window, or may in some other way endanger themselves or others.
You know, I took this stuff, and I was terribly, terribly frightened. And I can't...
These people belong to a Greenwich Village group called Encounter, a group dedicated to reforming drug users. They all know the dangers of LSD. Now, for this investigation, they recall the agony of recurrence, of reliving the acid hallucination long after LSD has left the bloodstream.
I was laying in bed and I was trying to go to sleep, and I opened my eyes, and all of a sudden the window in the room disappeared, and the room was just filled with bright lights, and I was completely paranoid. You know, I didn't know what to do, and I just laid there and shivered. I was really... To me, it seemed like it lasted for hours.
Did you know what was happening? I mean, did you know it was a recurrence or what?
Yeah, I knew it was a recurrence. I knew it was happening after. You know, when it happened, I just opened my eyes and it just hit me.
How many recurrences like this have you had since that trip 8 months ago?
I'd say about 8.
About 8?
Yeah. I had one, I was at my girlfriend's apartment, and I was sitting down watching television, and she has an antenna that sits on top of the TV, and it started to get up and dance around.
Did you enjoy any of this?
No, I was completely frightened, because I knew that I wasn't taking LSD. And I wasn't getting high. I hadn't been getting high for quite a while.
I've had about, I should think, 10 recurrences. But what bothered me was having them on the job, because, you know, I would be working and suddenly, oh, Jesus, you know, and I would drop whatever I had, and this meant like graduates and syringes and surgeon's tools, crash on the floor. I'd drop them, and I would have to usually go run into the bathroom, because I found like, you know, relieving myself would get my mind off all this bullshit. After that, I would have to start pulling my hair very hard.
The more you take the drugs, the more you mess up your life. The more you mess up your life, the more you take drugs. But I think through Encounter, people learn to cope, and they find that without the drugs, it is a much better world.
It's like playing with a shotgun. And personally, I don't want to die. That's why I stopped taking drugs. Stopped taking LSD.
Dr. Daniel Casriel, Medical Superintendent of a Drug Rehabilitation Center on Staten Island, New York.
DATOP is many things. It is a non-profit corporation for the rehabilitation of addicts. It is a therapeutic community run almost exclusively by ex-addicts who help themselves and others to get well. Here in DATOP we have perhaps a half a dozen or a dozen people who have used LSD. We treat them exactly the same as we treat the other type of chemical users. The method of treatment is primarily a group interaction.
They made that whole scene down in the village with, you know, peyote, mescaline, marijuana, morning glory seeds, and the whole rest of it. But the whole scene is just that, man, because, you know, like, I never had any friends really in school at all. And Down there, it's easier. You know, what do you have to do to be hip? You just got to use as much as anybody else is using, and you're accepted. It's much easier to get accepted there. You don't have to try hard, you know?
You don't have to be a person. You don't have to be yourself. All you have to do is use the drug and say a couple of words you heard somebody else say, like mind consciousness expansion.
Yeah. And then you've got a good excuse. Then you've got a really beautiful excuse. Well, I'm using it to find out the inner meanings of life, you know. They said that you could see inside yourself and all things like that. And I guess that's what they're really looking for. They're trying to, you know, find out who they were through the use of the drug, which I guess you really, you know, I'm sure you can't ever do.
Yeah, one of the fellows was telling me once that he had a friend that took a trip on that, and he actually believed, I guess this is how it works on your mind, and he actually believed that he could stop a car, and this was in his neighborhood, and he ran in front of this car, and naturally, you know, like he got wasted, you know, and the fellow died.
Dr. Casriel is outspoken about the dangers of LSD.
LSD is a very dangerous drug. To me, it is much more dangerous than heroin. And certainly, as LSD becomes more in vogue, you'll see greater and greater problems with it. I've been called upon to evaluate a boy who murdered while under the influence of LSD. I've known people who committed suicide under the influence of LSD, and I've known many who have become psychotic weeks and months after having used LSD. And even for those who do not become psychotic, those who have habituated themselves with the use of LSD seem to be changed and different. They are emotionally flat to the observer, even though introspectively they say they have tremendous feelings. They don't seem to be able to relate emotionally to other human beings. And what's even more frightening, they don't seem to care to relate to other human beings.
Richard Lynch is an actor. Until June this year, he was also an LSD user.
On June the 28th, 1967, I had strolled into the park of Central Park, and with a half a gallon of gasoline, I set myself on fire under the influence of LSD. I have had quite a few LSD experiences. When I attempted my last trip, I had just finished a screen test with Columbia Motion Pictures, and my career was flowering. I was a prosperous, promising young actor. If you would ever tell me that I would go into Central Park and try to burn myself to death, I would say that you were out of your mind. If you've taken your last, what you call your last LSD trip, and you really want to be hip, well, dig it, man. Be hip. Lay off it, because it does affect the mind. I'm a perfect example of what LSD can do to the human mind.
I'm Tim Knight. During the course of filming this investigation into LSD, I took my own acid trip. It was important to do that, important to get a fuller, more meaningful understanding of the acid experience. I was one of the lucky ones. I came out of my trip apparently undamaged. In fact, I had a good trip. I tried to recreate that trip on film. That's what you saw in the dream sequence earlier. You saw a young girl on her own trip. But since it was impossible to reproduce her trip, I substituted my own. It was authentic. You take a trip like that, knowing the dangers, for a reason. You want to know what all the excitement is about. You want to know what the acid trip is. Now I've taken the trip and I know what it does. And I believe strongly, I am convinced, that the dangers of LSD far outweigh any benefits. The scientists agree. They agree that the acid trip, the LSD trip, is just not worth taking.
I'm Dr. Walt Miner. I'm here to talk about LSD. The reason I'm talking about LSD is that I'm trying to counteract a lot of the popular publicity that you're reading about this material. It's very difficult today to pick up a newspaper or a magazine or listen to the radio without hearing about LSD. A lot of what you read is true, a lot more of it isn't true. You need all the facts. Now, nothing I'm going to say today is going to be emotional. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you the facts as we know them, facts that we can document. First and foremost, and perhaps the most unique thing about LSD, is the effective dose of the material. The dose of LSD is 0.5 to 1 micrograms per kilogram of body weight. Another thing that's unique about LSD, it doesn't seem to make much difference how you take it. You can take it by most any route you can think of, in a tablet, in a pill, on a sugar cube, in a liquid. Most drugs don't act this way. They have a critically specific route of administration. Now, for any drug, there's what we call a latent period, and that's the length of time between giving the drug and seeing the effect of the drug. And this latent period is dose route specific. If you give a drug by mouth, it's going to take longer to get the effect than if you give it by vein. Lo and behold, with LSD, it doesn't make a doggone bit of difference how you give it. You take it by mouth, you pump it directly into a vein. The latent period is the same. It's still going to take about an hour to get the effect. We've looked for LSD. We've looked to see where it goes. Where does it act? How does it work in the body? We've taken LSD and we've attached a radioactive substance to it, a carbon-14 atom, to the LSD molecule. We've given it to people and we've tried to count it and track it through the body to see where it goes. And this, again, is unique. LSD is absorbed almost instantly from the intestinal tract. It cycles through the brain very, very rapidly. The half-life of the compound in the body is about 7 minutes. Lo and behold, by the time you get symptoms from LSD, the LSD itself is gone, long gone. And I think this suggests to us how LSD probably acts. This is extremely important because it probably explains the problems and the side effects that we see with this material. It is extremely important to realize that the LSD itself does not produce the effect. What appears to happen is that in the brain there are certain chemical reactions which are possible but which do not take place. We have reactions that are cocked, as it were, like a gun, ready to go off, but they can't ordinarily. Along comes the LSD and it acts as a catalyst. It allows these otherwise impossible reactions to occur. And there they go. It takes a minute quantity to catalyze the reaction. Once the reaction is underway, it can continue. Back up just for a moment to answer a question that I'm constantly asked. Does LSD have any taste? Well, from what I've already told you about the dose and the route of administration, there really is no answer to that question. If you have enough LSD presented to you to be able to taste it anyway, you have 100 to 1,000 times more than you need to get the effect. Now, what are the effects of LSD on a person? Well, we've got to divide these into physical effects and mental effects. And the physical effects are clear-cut and they're reproducible. They are the same. I can tell you just about what's going to happen to your pulse and your respiration and your blood pressure and your eyeballs and everything else if you take LSD, but these aren't the important effects. The important effects are the mental effects. Now, to some extent, the mental effects of LSD depend on what's called the set and the setting. The set is what you expect to happen. It's how you feel at the moment, what you're thinking, whether you're nervous, whether you're worried, what you anticipate with the compound. The setting is just as it sounds. It's where you take it, the situation, the things surrounding you, the environment. What does happen when you take LSD? Within about 20 minutes, you will have some physical effects. And these are not particularly comfortable, but neither are they particularly uncomfortable. The heart beats a little faster, you breathe a little faster, you may feel a bit anxious. Within another 20 minutes, roughly, you will develop the mental effects. Now, these are the important ones. There is a rapid, very complete loss of contact with reality. There is a rapid loss of the body image. You may very well hear things that aren't there. You will certainly hear things that are there and hear them differently. You may see things that aren't there, but you will certainly see things that are there differently. There's a change in the size and the shape and the proportion and the colors of things that you are seeing ordinarily. And these changes themselves change rapidly and are highly colored, brilliantly colored. The loss of the body image means that it's very difficult for you to tell where you stop and the chair starts. It makes it equally difficult to tell if your thoughts are your own or belong to someone else. Are you thinking something or is the bulkhead thinking something? There's a loss of the body's sense of time. Now, ordinarily, we can sit and without a watch we can count off 15 seconds or a minute and we can be pretty close. On LSD, the body's natural clock just ceases to function. Time may be tremendously stretched or tremendously shrunken. Seconds may take hours and hours may take seconds. This is one of the reasons it's extremely dangerous for someone under the effects of LSD to drive an automobile. Now, these mental effects to the confirmed LSD user, to the evangelist, if you will, are felt to be religious and beautiful and godlike, perhaps because they expect them to be. Realistically speaking, they are nothing more nor less than a period of insanity. The only applicable word. Let's talk some more about these mental effects. Let me graph them for you, try to show you when they happen and how they happen. And we'll start talking about some side effects and some problems that we see with this material now. If we graph effects versus time, with effects on this axis, and time down here. We take the drug at time 0. These are hours. During the first hour is the onset of the mental effects. These effects will become more pronounced. They will increase until they reach a peak in about 6 hours. They will then gradually taper off for a total trip, if you will, of about 20 hours. After which we have another 48-hour period that corresponds very much to a hangover. Now, this is not a hangover of the kind with which you perhaps have had some experience. This is a mental rather than a physical hangover. This is a feeling, a period, a time of depression, feeling very, very badly, very low, very depressed, very bad with the world. So we're talking about a total trip here of about 72 hours. It would just fit into a weekend pass. Now, is this 72-hour trip any worse than a good, solid binge? And the answer is yes, it's a whole heck of a lot worse. One of the reasons is that alcohol is self-limiting. If you'll be honest with yourselves, if you start drinking and if you continue to drink steadily, you will, within a period of time, cease to function. If you continue to drink long enough, you will become horizontal and you will stop. With LSD, this doesn't happen. Unfortunately, the man who is psychotic on LSD can continue to function. He continues to do things. Worst of all, perhaps, he continues to do things and feel that he is doing them extremely well. Now, this is dangerous. What are some more of the dangerous effects of this material? What do you have to know if you're thinking about taking it? First and foremost, perhaps, and maybe the one that you've read the most about, is that some people, and I can't tell you if I'm talking about 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 100,000, but some people will reach the peak of these mental effects right here, and they will stay there. From here on out, these people are insane. They are psychotic. Now, what other immediate problems do we have with this material? This time period in here is extremely dangerous. If someone gives you this material and you don't know you're getting it, the time in which these mental symptoms are beginning and increasing is terrifying. If we take a man who knows he's getting LSD, perhaps he's had many trips and they've been pleasant, and yet in the rising phase of the mental effects, you put him under a little stress. And it doesn't take very much stress. It takes such a little stress that it may be that the lights are too bright, that the music on the phonograph isn't quite right, that there's a little noise outside, something. Any stress in this rising phase will trip this man into a bad trip. He will have the same effect as the man who is given the material and doesn't know he's getting it. He will be terrified. He's not seeing pretty visions, he's seeing monsters. He's losing his mind and he feels it going. He is intensely, extremely, terribly uncomfortable. If he is alone, if it's possible for him, there's only one escape from this discomfort. That's suicide. This man will kill himself if he has the opportunity to do so. If this man who trips into a bad trip in this phase is with a guide, and you're always supposed to take this with a guide, he trips into a bad trip, he becomes paranoid. He immediately blames this intense mental discomfort on the only person that's there to blame it on, the guide. If he can, he'll kill the guide. Now, I'm not talking about rare occurrences. I personally know of 2 attempted and 1 successful murders that have occurred right in here for that reason. Now, in this stage, during the peak of the mental effects, we again get deaths. And these are accidental deaths. I can't emphasize strongly enough how complete this depersonalization, this loss of body image, this omnipotent, godlike, omniscient feeling is that these people get. People in this phase of the mental symptoms frequently kill themselves. No intention of doing it at all, but they do. Many people, and I'm beginning to think that most people, certainly all of the users that I've interviewed at any length, have admitted that in this period of the mental effects they have felt that they could fly. Now, a user that feels strongly that he can fly and who goes out the first floor window is not in too much trouble. But if he's on the 7th deck, he's not going to make it. The flight is going to be brief. The end is consistently the same. There are probably a fair number of people in the United States bailing out of windows that they had no intention to bail out of. There's a well-documented case on the West Coast. A youngster took this material, godlike in his power, walked into the middle of the expressway and put out his hands to stop the cars, and they killed him. There's a young lady on the coast who, in this phase of an LSD trip, decided to walk across Oakland Bay, and she drowned. It's been 2,000 years since anybody has successfully walked on water. A certain number of people in this phase are going to have a convulsion, like an epileptic convulsion. Now, this is particularly dangerous if you happen to be driving a car at the time. Now, who's going to have troubles here and who isn't? There is no way to answer that question. The mental effects of this material are tremendously variable. They are completely unpredictable. You cannot tell what individual is going to have problems. You cannot tell for any given individual if he's going to have a good trip or a bad trip. Now, the popular magazines would like us to believe that the people who become psychotic, who become insane when they take this material, are people who are going to become insane anyway. Now, I'm not going to debate that point. The figures are pretty clear-cut on this subject. In the United States right now, in the population between the ages of 20 and 50, 1 person in 10 is going to become mentally ill. So maybe these people that trip out permanently on LSD are those 1 in 10. Okay. I can give you much, much, much better figures than that. In that same population between the age of 20 and 50, 100% of those people are going to die. Every single one of them. But why do it tomorrow? Now, maybe I'm one of these people who, in fact, is going to become insane somewhere between the age of 20 and 50. But maybe I was going to wait until I was 49 to do it. Now, I'd prefer to wait. I see no reason to rush it. I see no reason to take my LSD today and become insane today. I like it around here. We've still been talking about immediate effects that we're going to see within 1, 2, or 3 days of taking this drug. The effects that bother us, the effects that just scare the devil out of me, are not these, they're the late effects. Now, first of all, there's judgment. There's just no question that taking LSD changes your judgment. It changes your discrimination, it changes your ambition, your goal striving, it changes the way you think, it changes your brain. And I'm not talking about a change that lasts a few hours or a few days. I'm talking about a change that we know lasts months. The chief of the Department of Medicine at Harvard University Medical School says that no man who has taken even 1 dose of LSD should make a major decision for at least 3 months. The only disagreement I have with that statement is that I think we should double that time. I think 6 months, maybe. We know that someone who takes LSD has brain damage. We know that this drug damages the brain. We can see this on brainwave tracings, electroencephalograms. We know that the brain is different. It's difficult to demonstrate how different. And we haven't gotten enough brains in bottles from acid heads yet to dissect them to see where this damage is. But we can demonstrate electrically that the brain is different. A terribly frightening thing about LSD, and this is new, we don't fully understand it. We've just begun to realize it. Is that if you put some blood in a bottle, and you put a little LSD in that bottle, and you let the blood cells grow, and you go back and look at them a little later, the chromosomes, the genes, those parts of our cells which determine what we are going to be, have shattered. The only thing that we know of that gives you the same effect on the genes, actually 2 things. One is a large dose of whole body radiation, and the other is the disease leukemia. Now, if in fact these shattered genes are a permanent change, and we don't know that yet, but in the other 2 cases it is permanent, we must assume that that person who has taken the LSD, and we can demonstrate these shattered genes in LSD takers, has become genetically different. He has mutated, and we must assume that he will produce abnormal progeny, that he will have abnormal kids. It is a very, very frightening thought that carried perhaps to its extreme, that a 16-year-old high school girl could take LSD for kicks and find out that for the rest of her life she could never have a normal child. We don't know what sort of abnormalities to expect. We have no idea. But abnormal genes are going to produce abnormal kids. Now, from the Navy's point of view, there is one unique thing about LSD that is perhaps most important to us from the standpoint of operations and survival. With LSD, it's possible, after even 1 dose, that at any time, with no warning, no way to predict when it's going to happen, you can have a full, complete, full-intensity recurrence of all the LSD symptoms without taking any more LSD. We know nothing else that acts in any way, shape, or form like this. There may be somebody in the Navy who once upon a time, perhaps, drank a little bit more than he should have one time. But I can guarantee to you that if you take that man to sea with you, once he's sober, that after he's been at sea for 5 or 6 weeks and has had no more alcohol, he is not suddenly going to come down drunk. Any man who has ever taken LSD can at any time suddenly develop a recurrence. Now, what's any time? Am I talking about days or weeks? No. I'm talking about months. The longest recurrence that I can document is 2 years after taking LSD. These recurrences can come on with no warning. They can be triggered by many, many things. They can be triggered by lights, colored lights, flashing lights, the kind of lights that we tend to have on a lot of our panels. They can be triggered by sensory deprivation. That's a nice long word, and it simply means being in a position where you can't see the outside, you can't feel the wind, you can't hear the birds. You're in a stable, fixed, quiet, even-temperatured environment. I'm describing a ship. I'm describing a submarine. I'm describing the interior compartments of most any ship. I'm talking about colored lights and thinking about the control panels in airplanes. Now, we know of civilian recurrences. We know of lots of them. We know of the lady who was driving an automobile down the expressway and suddenly the car in front of her ballooned up to 100 times as big as it ought to be. And she knew that she could never drive around this huge automobile. And she went into a complete panic and stopped and ran off into a store. We know of another lady who was driving on the Los Angeles freeway 6 months after having taken LSD and suddenly depersonalized, suddenly lost her body image, suddenly split into two people and had no idea which of the two people was driving. And she almost ran off a bridge, and that lady's still insane and she's still in a hospital. This is the dangerous part from our point of view. A man who takes LSD, a man who has taken LSD, cannot be considered reliable. In any situation, at any time, unexpectedly, he can become insane on you. Now, this stuff scares me to death. I have no intention whatsoever of risking my career, my judgment, my ambition, my kids, and my sanity so that I can sit for 12 or 15 hours and watch pretty colored lights behind my eyeballs. I would like you to think about what I've said, decide if the risk is worth it.
I've got the right dissipation. Well, now that's how I check you. And so I know I've got it right.
I'll tell you why it disappeared.